Now we've deployed our Django project into production a few times, and this whole time I've been assuming that before you actually push any code, you run python manage.py test. Now hopefully you're laughing to yourself a little bit because number one, you may have only ran this command one time, and number two, you don't think I should assume anything, and I actually agree with you. So in this one, we actually want to solve that assumption problem by using Github Actions. What Github Actions allows us to do is to actually run a workflow every time I do something on Git. So if we click on the suggested workflow, which is this Django one, so even if you don't see this one, the general idea is it will give us this option to run installing our requirements as well as manage.py test. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do something very similar to this, but also include another key feature, which is the same kind of database that we're using in production. Of course, that production database is a Postgres database in here, right? So when we actually did the configuration, you would have seen all that as to what exactly that database is. But in this case, it's actually a Postgres database with a version of 12, which we can verify in our app spec as well. So what I want to do then is I want to go into my actions, and I'm going to go ahead and set up a workflow yourself. This is the command we want to run off of. Now, the only reason I'm doing it this way is so that you have a better idea of how to run this whenever you want to run it, right? So you don't actually are working off of somebody else's template. In a way, you're working off of mine, but at the very least, you can actually go ahead and just jump off of this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this whole thing, and we're going to work on this actually locally. By all means, go ahead and work on it in GitHub, but I want to work on it locally in VS Code. So I'm going to go ahead and make a folder called GitHub. Inside of there, I'm going to make another folder called workflows. And inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and do main.yaml. I like using YAML with an A. Obviously, you can use YAML without an A as well. Maybe that's not obvious, but it certainly is a way to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this first thing in here, and I'm actually not going to do any changes to it just yet. Instead, what I'm going to do is say git status, and then do git add, and then git commit, and then added our first CI workflow. And then we'll go ahead and git push origin main. Okay, so what should happen now is if we go into our actions, we should actually see this workflow in here. I should be able to click it on it, and this workflow has a dispatch event trigger, right? So that means that I can actually run this workflow whenever, but it actually ran for me as well. So you can kind of pick and choose on how those things go, and we can see everything related to this workflow. Now in this case, nothing happened, right? Really, it just said like hello world, which is fine. You could totally continue along these lines, but what we want to do is build this out to actually running our project, right? So that's going to be inside of these steps right here. Now you might be like, hey, that actually looks kind of familiar to what we did with app.yaml. I think it's only familiar because, well, it's in YAML. That's pretty much it. And this is just a very common configuration for doing this kind of continuous integration step. Now in our case, it's going to be both continuous integration and continuous deployment. So CI/CD with Django, Postgres, and DigitalOcean. Okay, so this is actually what we want to run. I'll leave these branches as is. I'll leave this workflow dispatch in here as well. But now what I want to do is I actually want to add in a new service in here, right? So we can leave runs on Ubuntu latest, that's fine. But right underneath this, I want to go ahead and do services. And this one is going to be a Postgres, let's just say Postgres main. Now the only reason I'm calling it Postgres main is to show you that, well, you can name this service however you'd like. And I also want to highlight something about this in just a little bit. Next, we're going to go ahead and declare the image. What image do I mean? This is actually a Docker image. So the Docker image for Postgres 12, if you use Postgres 11, you probably would be okay. I'm going to be using the same version that I'm using in production, which is 12 in this case. Of Of course, if you're not sure what it is, go back into DigitalOcean, into that expect, and actually look at the version that's in there for that Postgres. Now, these services can be pretty much any Docker image. That's pretty cool, I think. And there's a lot of stuff that we could do with workflows, but for now, I'm just going to focus on that. The next few things are related to our environment variables. So the first one is our Postgres user. I'm just going to go ahead and use a lot of their defaults, and I'll do a few items in here. The user, the password, and then I'll go ahead and say the database. This I will actually change to DJ testing. And then finally, we'll go ahead and add in ports, the actual ports we want to expose, which we'll go ahead and use the default ports here. No surprise there. Then I'm going to go ahead and add in some optional options that you may or may not want to have. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste these from my blog post. Now, the reason I'm mentioning the blog post now is because, well, I don't want it to be a full crutch. I kind of want to explain what's going on here, but you can absolutely use the post for the app.yaml. So here's the blog post right here, and this is almost identical to the app.yaml that we're going to be working off of. And so this is really just an optional thing to make sure that this actual Postgres image is ready and it's healthy. We didn't do a whole lot here, but we did set some of our own settings here that we will absolutely need to use. Okay, so this right here is checking out our code. I'm actually going to give it a name, and we'll go ahead and say checkout local or checkout code. That's probably a better way to do it. We'll tab that in here. Next one we want to do is we're going to be setting up just Python 3. So I'll go ahead and call it a name of setup Python 3.6. Now, I've been using 3.6 locally, and I also use it in production, right? So if we go back into our runtime.txt, that's this right here, right? So I'm just going to be using whichever version of 3.6 that GitHub will get for me. Now, there is a way to test more than one version, which by all means do that. But in my case, I'm just trying to test my code. I'm not necessarily trying to test it against all different Python versions, because that actually doesn't matter given our runtime. Okay, so this uses a built-in action called actions/setup-python at v2. And that is built in to GitHub Actions. And we can say with, and then Python-version, and this is 3.6. Give it a little space there. Okay, cool. Now, after that, let's go ahead and get rid of these commands. We don't need that one. Now the next step, after we've checked out our code and set up Python, I'm going to go ahead and install my requirements. Let's actually install requirements. What is it that I want to do here? I just want to run pip install -r requirements.txt. This would be a good place to use other kinds of tools as well, or maybe adding another step. Let's say, for instance, you had pip env here. You would have one step above and then run pip env install, right? I'm not using pip env, I'm using requirements.txt, but that is a step that you could definitely add in. Next, what we want to do is we want to just simply run our tests. Whoa, we're already ready to run our tests. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and set up a few environment variables. Now, the environment variables I certainly need are these right here, right? There is another one that I know that I need, which is the actual port for Postgres, because we certainly do change it. Now, in the case of these environment variables, as in what I for sure need, this is going to have to take some knowledge as to what's going on with my project altogether. But one of the things that would be telling is in the .env file. So we see debug in here, we see allowed host. When it comes to testing code, we don't actually necessarily need allowed host every time. We probably should add that in, but I'm not going to do that. But I do see the secret key is in here. And I also see that there's AWS keys as well as some other things. So this is actually what I would end up going off of for all of my environment variable files in the future. But in my case right now, I'm just going to go ahead and do the basics, which is Django secret key. And I'll just say CI/CD test key. because that secret key doesn't matter, but it does need to be set. And then also debug. I'm just going to go ahead and set that equal to the string of 0. Right? So I definitely need those environment variables prior to running. Oops, let's go ahead and run. And we can use a pipe here to actually bring it down a line and run python manage.py test. In fact, I'll do that up here as well, just to make it very clear as to what my run statement is. Okay, and so that's it. This will set up a Postgres database for us, and then it's going to run all of these steps. Now, another step I could have ran if I were to want to have it, and that is run collect static, right? And then I would actually come in here and run collect static and no input. Now, one of the things I would not run in here is migrate because, well, I'm using a test database. Of course, unless I was trying to use that test database for something or actually testing out migrate, that might be one of the things that I use. But I'm going to go ahead and just use python manage.py test itself, and that's it for now. So let's go ahead and do git status, git add -- all, git commit, and updated main CI CD pipeline, and then git push origin main. Okay, so the thing that I haven't really done yet is the CD of it all. So what I want to do is I want to actually push this main branch into another branch. I actually want to upgrade it into another branch. So to do this, it's going to take a few extra steps. After that, what I want to do is actually push it into the actual do-ctl command. I want to use that do-ctl command to push it into production. So let's go back into our DigitalOcean commands here, and I want to change a few things. So inside of my settings, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this auto code deploy here. We'll save that. And then I want to go into my API tab here. And then I'm going to go ahead and generate a new token. And this is going to be my GitHub TD CI CD token, essentially. Okay, so I'll go ahead and copy that. And we'll run copy here. And then inside of our GitHub repository, I'm going to go into settings, the actual repository itself, and then go into secrets. And let's go ahead and add a secret here inside of our environment. Or not environments, but secrets and new repository secret. We'll paste in that code here, and we'll call this our DO access token. Add secret. Okay, so that's now a secret in here that we can remove, change, whatever. If we go to update it, notice the value is gone. Okay, so going back into our actions locally, what I can do here is I can run name and install doctl, and this is going to be uses DigitalOcean / action -doctl at v2, and then name, or actually want to add one more thing in here, which is with, and then the token itself, which we can use those secrets with the $, 2 curly brackets, just like this, secrets dot do access token. And then from here, we can actually run a doctl command. Okay, and we'll just go ahead and say run with a pipe again. And this is doctl apps update. And I need to add in a secret for this, so we'll go ahead and do that in a second. But secrets.do app ID, and then our spec file, which will be under do/app.yaml. Make sure you get the actual YAML extension correct. There we go. And so we're going to go ahead and add that app token in. Again, let's go ahead and make another secret here. Go into DigitalOcean, go into our apps here, and we really just want to get the app ID itself. The easiest way to do this would probably be locally, which is what I'll do. So doctl apps and list format, and there's going to be spec.name and ID. And here it is right here. So notice I'm using the one I deployed in the console originally, and we'll just put that in here now. Okay, so now we have the actual command that's going to end up updating our project. Now there is still one more thing that I want to add in here, which is the actual branch that I'm going to use. And so I created this action that's going to push our main branch into production. And the goal here is to actually use a action that I created, so coding for entrepreneurs /action branch to branch at main. And then what we want to have in here is a destination branch, and there's going to be production-3, and then a source branch. This is going to be main, and then a commit message being release production version. Okay, so this right here will override whatever's on that destination branch, right? So when it's built, assuming that the tests were successful, it's going to override production-3 with the new code. And then after that, we will push that stuff into production. So in app.yaml, this is actually where I'm going to want to change the branch itself. Now, this is actually not going to work for my current environment because I actually have DigitalOcean running off of Team CFE, not Try Django in coding for entrepreneurs. But I'm going to go ahead and solve that in a little bit. But for now, we've got this stuff. There is still one other challenge that I have to have, and that is adding a Env file. And this is going to be our GitHub token, and that's going to be equal to secrets.personal access token. So we have to add this in, not secrets, but secrets. There we go. And let's go back in here. Let's create our secret here. And to do this, I'm actually going to open up a new GitHub window. We'll go down to our user settings, and then we're going to want to navigate to our developer settings, and then our personal access tokens here. We're going to go ahead and generate a new personal access token. In this case, I'm going to say no expiration. You absolutely should have expiration dates. So let's go ahead and stick with their recommendation for 7 days, because I'm actually going to delete this one anyway. You won't ever see it. And so this one is going to be our GitHub action token for Try Django 3.2. Okay, so we have 7 days, and we're going to go ahead and add a repo here. Now, I probably don't need all permissions, but I think I just need the repo permissions, full control of the repositories. So we're going to go ahead and generate this token here, and I'm going to copy that one, go back into my action secrets here, and add that secret. Now that I've got all that, let's go ahead and just verify that I actually do not have that branch yet. So production 3, do not have that branch yet. So let's go ahead and add this in. So now git status, git add -- all, git commit, updated our workflow, and git push origin main. Now I realized we actually never looked at the workflow from before if it was successful, and it looks like it was, which is nice. So we can actually go in here and see the entire thing. It installed setup Python 3.6. It should have initialized the container for Postgres. It should have ran Postgres. It doesn't see an Env file, but it does run those tests. Everything was good. And then it stops the Postgres container as well as any other container that's running, and the job was complete. Or at least I believe that's what happened. But now what's going on is it should actually be pushing my other action in here. And this one might run into issues for a couple of things, but hopefully it doesn't run into issues with anything related to tests, but rather pushing the code into that branch and then maybe even going into DigitalOcean itself. I suspect that DigitalOcean is going to fail, at least that command, the very last one in this case. So for me, that's a command I actually probably will not end up using. Right, I probably will not end up using the run a docctl command. And in this case, it's giving me that it failed. Now, this is a secret environment variable, cannot be displayed. So perhaps there's something that I need to update with my actual code itself with app.yaml. But I suspect that not only is the app.yaml not perfect, but also the fact that I'm actually not in the right user for this. I need to be on the Team CFE user, not the Coding for Entrepreneurs one, to actually run that docctl command. So let's go back into that user. And this user now could potentially run these actions, right? So I can actually fetch and merge. But yet again, I'm going to have to get all of those environment variables set up, which is not something I'm going to do right now, right? So it could absolutely run this workflow now that I have it on the correct branch. But again, it will absolutely fail on those final two. So really, for everybody, I'm actually going to not have those in there for now, and you could always reactivate them later. That is what that blog post is all about and why you should check that out. So if you do have any questions on these two things, this of course is something that we can absolutely do, and it's a very nice thing to have, but overall, running the tests is probably a little bit more important than having the perfect like switch to production mode and then also push into production as well. Although those things definitely do work, you just have to do it on the right user accounts and all that. Now, before we go, I actually separated out my two workflows here, the CI/CD portions. Now, main.yaml is still continuous integration, so it's still going to be doing the Django and Postgres tests, and it's going to go ahead and run all of this as needed. So this is something you can easily use without any third-party keys going in here, including the actual GitHub keys. Whereas the deploy portion, so deploy.yaml, requires you to have several things done correctly. First off, having your own personal access tokens to either DigitalOcean or GitHub, as well as your own personal DigitalOcean app ID, as well as the actual app.yaml file. The one that you have is 100% going to be different than the one I have, especially as it relates to these secret keys. So that is certainly the biggest challenge that I faced with trying to show you how to do that continuous deployment. As it stands right now, I can run this workflow on demand off of the branch that I want to run. Now that's also true for my Postgres branches as well, or the actual Django and Postgres test branches. I can run those on demand as well, or I can just run them when they're deployed. So at the very least, when I actually push code now into the main branch, it's going to run all of these things right here, no matter what. So that really solves the problem that I was having originally, which was, hey, are you even going to run this? Now, this also solves the problem for the repository that I've actually been using inside of my Django project itself. Is now that I know if I actually fetch and merge everything from the remote and literally just deploy main and do that automatically, I should be okay. But the other thing is now I can actually run these as well. I can run these triggers on here and it should work just fine in my own command as well. So if you do have any issues with that, please let us know and comment below. I will certainly update these as needed. And of course, if you're watching this much later and you go into these workflows and you see that they are different, that means that I had to change them to ensure that they were working fully correctly. And that's also why I did create this blog post as well. So this should be the way it's going to be explained, or at least will have the latest, workflows in here as well. And probably as one big workflow, because this guide assumes that you're really just doing this on your own. You're not building off of the Try Django project per se.